Hello everyone. Tonight we are going to slip quietly into the cobblestone alleys of Renaissance Italy, where the color of your robe could get you fined, your shoes could start a scandal, and just one velvet sleeve might ruin your whole reputation. You probably won't survive a week in 1480s Florence. Not because of plague or sword fights or bad dental hygiene, though fair. No, you'd be undone by something far more delicate, your wardrobe. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. Tell me your city and local time in the comments. It's fun seeing where you're all listening from. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soft noise, and let's get started tonight. You're messing around in a tiny shop off the Via de Tornabuoni, running your fingers over bolts of velvet that practically hum with forbidden potential. The merchant leans in, winks, and whispers, "Crimson, contraband, but soft as angel thighs." You don't know how angels feel, but this cloth? It makes your pulse skip. You've been in Florence for 3 days. You came for the art, maybe a tryst, but somehow, inevitably, you've gotten sucked into its real passion, fashion politics. Everyone looks suspiciously fabulous here, and no one will admit they're breaking any rules. Of course, there are rules. Too many. Officially, they're called sumptuary laws. Unofficially, they're don't look hotter than the Duke laws. Passed by city councils and enforced by officials with the wildly dramatic title Uomini del Buon Costume, men of good behavior. These laws were meant to keep vanity, extravagance, and your ego in check. But today, you're feeling bold. The velvet merchant offers to tailor the crimson doublet to your frame, lining it with subtle gold thread that won't catch candlelight unless you want it to. It's smooth. It's dangerous. It's entirely illegal unless you're nobility or happen to be named Medici. Still, you say yes. That night, at the Feast of San Giovanni, you wear the crimson like a second skin. The crowd smells like roast goose, garlic, and tension. Somewhere in the piazza, a lute hits a sour note. You feel dozens of eyes on you, not admiring, calculating. "Who is that?" someone whispers. "He's not on the allowed velvet list," someone else murmurs. Velvet list. Yes, that was real. Suddenly a child sneezes on your sleeve, and you think, this is how it ends. Velvet death by toddler mucus. You slip away into a side alley, wondering if you've imagined the scrutiny. You haven't. The next morning, you are politely, almost lovingly, summoned. A wax-sealed note pressed into your palm by a courier whose shoes are even more illegal than your outfit. Peacock blue, with gold tassels. Bold move. The letter reads, "You are requested to appear before the Commission of Decency regarding your recent crimson indulgence." You've officially been noticed. Historians still debate whether these laws were truly about modesty or more about controlling class anxiety. In Florence, the lines between merchant wealth and old nobility were blurring, and the council didn't like the idea that a silk merchant's daughter could outshine a duke's niece at Massachusetts. So they regulated luxury down to absurd degrees. How wide your sleeves could be, how much fabric you could use in a dress, how many pearls were allowed on your belt. Answer, usually 7. 8 was asking for it. Of course, the irony? The Medicis, the very family that funded half the Renaissance, technically broke these laws every time they threw on a cloak. But no one stopped them, because power wears what it wants. As you walk toward your hearing, past frescoes that have more gold leaf than your savings account, you start to sweat, not from guilt, but from the heat. Velvet was not a summer fabric. No one tells you that. Your mind drifts to an off-topic fact. Flamingos were once considered a nobleman's delicacy in parts of Italy. Served chilled, tongue only. It's a reminder that taste has always been a strange beast. Inside the chamber, the panel greets you with silence and judgment. An elderly man in modest will gestures for you to stand. "Is it true," he asks, in a tone that suggests he once saw Satan in a sequin, "that you wore crimson velvet with gold lining to a public feast?" You nod, gently, like velvet would nod. "Do you hold noble rank?" You smile. Emotionally, yes. No one laughs. Tough crowd. They ask more questions. About your tailor. About your income. About whether you intended to seduce anyone at the event using fabric as a weapon. Finally, they fine you 10 florins and issue a formal warning. You breathe. That's it. You expected stocks, or at least a public shaming parade with live geese. But here's the kicker. The fine is exactly what the tailor told you it would be. You realize, slowly, that this is a game, a tax for the fabulous, a soft bribe to keep the illusion of order. As you walk out, a young woman passes you in a midnight blue gown dusted with seed pearls. She nods in solidarity. You nod back, and just like that, you're in it. The hidden world of outlaw fashion, where elegance whispers and the rules are more of a suggestion. The letter said summon, but no one actually stopped you from walking home in the same outfit. In fact, as you pass through Florence's winding streets again, you're starting to notice something. Almost everyone is breaking the rules. The butcher's daughter has lace trim on her sleeves. That's technically forbidden unless you're married, wealthy, or pretending to be either. The baker is wearing a red hat. Not quite cardinal red, but suspiciously close. And two little boys are wearing matching tunics made of damask, which would be adorable if it weren't technically a finable offense. It hits you. These laws aren't enforced by the officials. They're enforced by everyone else. They're enforced by snitches. You barely make it down via Del Bel Dawn before it happens. A man steps out of a side alley with the studied calm of someone who's read the laws cover to cover and enjoys making other people suffer through them. Lovely morning, he says, looking you up and down like a tailor with a grudge. That shade of crimson looks aspirational. You're not sure if it's a compliment or a threat. Then comes the phrase you'll grow to loathe. I filed a concern with the blonde costume. You raise an eyebrow. You mean the morality office? He smirks. You're lucky it's not a priest. They charge more. And just like that, your name has entered the record for a second time. This time thanks to a jealous silk merchant who, rumor has it, once lost a mistress to a man with better boots. Not more attractive, just better footwear. You shrug it off, but now you know the truth. Every outfit is a gamble. We're something legal, you blend in. We're something slightly too fabulous. You risk someone, somewhere, pulling a velvet grudge on you. Here's the uncomfortable part. Sometimes, these tattlers weren't even real people. Some cities allowed anonymous complaints. Drop a note in a box, claim someone wore silver thread above their station, and poof, they'd be summoned. No need to confront them. Just mail the gossip like poison pen letters with a postal code. Historians still debate whether this anonymity helped enforce moral virtue or just created a black market of petty vengeance and passive-aggressive stylists. One woman in Padua was fined 3 times in 6 months for excessive hat height. On the last fine, she started arriving to church with a bare head, muttering, "May God measure me, not my accessories." And people say fashion isn't spiritual. You try to lay low for a few days, swapping your flamboyant crimson for a dull gray tunic that feels like wearing disappointment. You keep it wrinkle-free. You even learn to fold it using only your elbows, which is both impractical and unnecessarily impressive. But it's not enough. Your neighbor, an aging widow who wears black like a weapon, leans over her balcony one morning and says, "You know, the cut of your sleeves, a bit wide, no?" You look up. "I think they're within code." She sniffs. "So did my niece. Now she's in Lucca." The implication is unclear, but you nod solemnly. That evening, you decide to ask someone who knows the rules, not some bitter busybody. You want the real scoop. So you visit the records office, where copies of every law, amendment, and failed bill are stacked like an old librarian's nightmare. You meet with a young clerk who clearly resents his job but appreciates your curiosity. There are 82 sumptuary laws in Florence alone. He tells you, eyes scanning a parchment thicker than your wallet. Most people only know about 5. Like the one where women can't wear more than one jeweled hairpiece in public, or the rule against decorative buttons shaped like animals. That's a rule? You ask, incredulous. He nods. Someone once had a lion carved from ivory on their collar. The bishop got jealous. He leans closer. But here's the trick. These laws are impossible to follow completely. They're meant to be broken. That's how the city makes money. Every fine funds another fresco. Every violation pays for more war horses. It suddenly makes sense. You're fine? Not about morality. About municipal budgeting with flair. And then he adds, also, the guy who fined you last week? His wife wears French lace under her cloak. Everyone knows. You leave the office with a renewed sense of purpose and a plan. If you can't avoid being watched, maybe you can learn to weaponize it. Play the game. Be seen, but never quite guilty. The next morning, you wear a modest beige coat over a patterned shirt with just enough shimmer to start rumors. You call it the maybe silk look. And right on cue, Your neighbor peers down, frowns, and sighs. Florence isn't what it used to be. You smile, wave, and head out, sleeves tucked, barely. At the market, you spot a merchant selling figs and whispering loudly about a noble woman who wore velvet to confession. Scandalous. You buy a fig just for the gossip. Then you hear another, even better rumor. Someone in Milan has been arrested for smuggling ostrich feathers. You're not sure if it's real, but it's enough to set your next goal. Time to find out just how illegal a feather can be. You're in Milan now, a city with even more opinions about what should and should not sparkle. You came chasing a rumor, ostrich feathers, smuggled under the guise of religious accessories. Of course, you told people you were here to see the cathedrals. You winked when you said it. Your first clue comes from a hat maker named Aldo, who works out of a cramped corner shop smelling of glue, lavender oil, and ancient thread tension. He's hunched over a bonnet decorated with something decidedly non-Milanese, curled fringe. A customer leaves wearing what looks like a cross between a chandelier and a helmet. You wait until the bell over the door stops jingling. Aldo, you whisper, I heard there was a feather incident. He freezes, then slowly turns to you. Which one? This is promising. You learn that Milan's sumptuary laws don't mess around when it comes to hats. In 1492, a woman was fined 3 florins for simply contemplating a headpiece with imported plumage. The feathers weren't even on her head, just held up in front of a mirror. And as for men, Milan once passed a law that all male citizens must keep their hat ribbons muted. No sapphire blues, no emerald greens. Someone wore a canary yellow ribbon to a funeral, and it was considered an act of war. But feathers? Feathers were different. Feathers implied arrogance, whimsy, and the worst sin of all in Renaissance Italy, attention-seeking. Aldo tells you the story of the feather panic of Milan, which is just as overblown as it sounds. It started small. A young courtier wore an ostrich feather to a poetry reading. He called it ironic. 2 days later, his cousin wore 3. By the end of the month, it was a full-blown competition. Who could wear the most exotic feather, balanced the most ridiculously? Heron feathers, peacock fans. One man supposedly glued dove wings to a flat cap and called it heaven's ceiling. That man later had to appear before a sumptuary tribunal, barefoot and hatless. You laugh. Sounds made up. Aldo shakes his head. I stitched heaven's ceiling myself. But the real trouble began when people started smuggling feathers from the south. Ostrich feathers, in particular, were prized. They were wide, delicate, and horrifically expensive. The church hated them. Nobles adored them. The city council wrote an emergency law overnight, banning all feathered headwear not produced in Lombardy, which, as you can guess, only made them more fashionable. Historians still debate whether the law was meant to preserve local trade or just to squash a rival court's fashion statement. Either way, it led to a black market of bird-based headgear. Imagine people lining their cloaks with pigeon feathers just to make a statement. No one looked good, but everyone felt dangerous. So naturally, you want one. You commission Aldo for a subtle hat, just one plume, understated, more flirt than felony. He sighs, but takes your coin. 2 days later, you're walking through Milan's central plaza, the feather bobbing gently in the breeze like a sleepy flag of rebellion. It's not even white, it's taupe. You thought you'd blend in. Instead, you're approached by a city official whose uniform appears to be 40% ruffled. You there, he says, what is that growth on your head? You pause. A metaphor. He blinks. You'll need to come with me. And so you're marched, feathers still fluttering, to the civic hearing hall, which you're starting to suspect exists solely for the purpose of fashion offenses. You're seated on a bench that smells like fear and perfume. One of the other offenders, a teenage boy, has been cited for lacing his doublet in a pattern that implies romantic interest. Another, an elderly woman, is there because her shoes squeaked and someone decided they were enchanted. You get to listen as the council debates whether your feather is seditious. One member thinks it is. Another says you look more confused than criminal. The third sneezes and declares, I think it's cursed. Eventually, they settle on a fine. 5 florins. But the real punishment? Your name is now in the Registro della Veneta, the Register of Vanity, a leather-bound ledger reserved for repeat offenders. You wonder if they write it in glitter ink. As you leave, someone slips you a note. It reads, if you really want to know how the feathers get through customs, meet me by the abandoned olive press at midnight. Come alone. We're linen. You do. And there, under the moon, you meet Giada, Milan's most efficient feather smuggler. She's wearing burlap and smells faintly of lemons. She shows you a stash of feathers hidden in old wine barrels, wrapped in sheets of outdated church music. She smiles. If you're going to break the law, you may as well look good doing it. Later that night, lying in your rented room, you think about how absurd this all is. Fashion is crime, fabric as rebellion. But then you remember, laws are just how the powerful try to trap beauty in a box. Odd fact, in Venice, at one point, all gondoliers were banned from wearing excessively flirtatious earrings. One wore hoops anyway, claiming it helped him steer emotionally. It worked. You drift off to sleep wondering how many people have gotten married, arrested, or immortalized in oil paintings, all because of a stupid feather. You return to Florence with a hatbox full of trouble. Literally, you told the border clerk it was filled with muffins for a sick aunt, but the scent of peacock and guilt clings to you like a fashionable curse. No one opens the box. That's the thing with fashion laws. They're selectively enforced. They don't want to catch everyone, just enough people to make you scared of being fabulous. Back home, you head straight to your tailor. His shop smells like pressed linen and burned ambition. His name is Remigio, and he's the type of man who sows gossip into every hem. His eyes light up when he sees you. You're back, he says. With contraband? You lift the hatbox, slow and smug. Peacock. Milan grade. Remigio whistles. Feathers are out. You're 3 weeks late. What's in now? He shrugs. Tiny bells sewn into the sleeves. Quiet ones. Subversive. You hand him the hatbox anyway, and he carefully removes the feathered creation like it's a relic. We'll bury it properly, he says. You think he's joking. You're not sure. Later that week, you ask him something that's been gnawing at you since Milan. How does anyone keep up with what's legal? He leads you to the back of the shop, past bolts of modest fabric and safe wool, to a hidden drawer in his workbench. He opens it slowly, dramatically. Inside are 3 tiny booklets, handbound. These, he whispers, are the real laws. You flip through them. They're not official. They're insider lists, noble clients, loopholes, fabric import tricks, banned colors that quietly became legal again once the Duke's mistress wore them. They're scribbled in tiny, panicked handwriting. I thought this was all about modesty, you murmur. Remigio snorts. It's about winning. One of the entries reads, gold thread limit, 3 inches visible. Remainder may be tucked under collar for spiritual warmth. Another says, emerald shoes are legal on feast days if they match your donation to the church. Historians still debate whether these underground guides were produced collaboratively by tailors or secretly leaked from the very councils writing the laws. In either case, they show a fashion system that doesn't just punish, it dances with danger. You spend the next few days exploring Florence's back alleys of style, meeting other tailors, each with their own hidden guides. One works only in cream and insists anything light enough to blend with fog is morally exempt. Another has a theory that the laws are secretly tested on clergy first. If the bishop doesn't get fined, she says, you're safe. One evening, Remigio shows you a doublet he's been working on for a wealthy banker. It looks ordinary until he flips it inside out. Hidden inside the lining is a layer of silk embroidered with a full scene from Dante's Inferno, flames, demons, the whole infernal parade. Why inside, you ask? So it doesn't count, he grins. No one finds what they can't see. And besides, it's for him, not the world. You try it on. It fits. Too well. There's a strange thrill in knowing you're wearing something technically illegal. Not because you want to rebel, because you want to feel alive in a world that keeps asking for beige. That night, you wear the doublet under a plain gray overcoat and walk through the city like you're smuggling treasure, which, honestly, you are. You pass through a square where a preacher is yelling about vanity and wicked threads. The crowd listens politely but slowly drifts away. You notice something. Even the preacher's robe has subtle decorative stitching. You nod in approval. Quiet hypocrisy is still fashion. But not everyone is subtle. A woman steps out from the crowd, wrapped in a gown so shimmering it might be offensive to the sun. The color is blue, not dark navy or dusty indigo, but the kind of blue that makes oceans insecure. Her sleeves spill over her hands in layered silk. Her shoes sparkle. It's not subtle. It's not legal. It's art. The crowd gasps. The preacher stammers. She walks slowly. She knows she's being watched. And she knows exactly what that means. You learn her name later. Constanza de Rovere. Daughter of no one important. Heiress of nothing. But she's infamous in the tailor world as a legal illusionist. Every piece she wears is technically within code. Technically, one fewer pearl than the limit. Sleeves cut just under the maximum width. But the fabric combinations? The palette? Devastating. Constanza becomes your quiet obsession. You follow her fashion trail like a spy. You hear that she once sewed a black opal into her hem and said it was for balance. Another time, she lined her neckline with fox fur, then claimed the fox had volunteered. She's never been fined. Not once. One day, you get brave. You approach her near the Arno. I think your belt is about 3 millimeters too wide. She smiles. And yet, no one stops me. How? She leans close. Because I look like I know what I'm doing. Confidence is its own immunity. You start taking notes. Odd fact, Renaissance tailors had to pass exams in geometry, not for pants, but for keeping sleeves theologically balanced. A crooked hem was believed to reflect a crooked soul. And yes, there's a painting of St. Lawrence smiting someone for uneven cuffs. You start seeing clothes differently, not as protection, not as style, as language. And like all languages, you learn to lie fluently. You wake up one morning to the sound of fabric being slapped. Not thunder, not footsteps, just angry silk meeting wood. You shuffle to the window and spot Remigio in the alley, arguing with a man holding a very shiny, very illegal-looking cloak. It's too loud, Remigio hisses. It's blue, the man argues. Exactly, it's blue. It's not a great time to interrupt, but curiosity overcomes you. You wander down and learn that the man, Tommaso, a minor noble's secretary, is furious because Remigio refused to finish a doublet made of imported Florentine brocade stitched with silver wire. I'm not risking the workshop over a date night. Remigio snaps, pointing at the glittering cloak like it insulted his mother. Tommaso storms off in a trail of billowing opulence, leaving behind the cloak and a story. Remigio sighs and turns to you. He's going to wear it anyway. Probably bribe someone. Probably get slapped with a 15 florin fine, then cry about it. Which leads to your next question. How do people actually get away with this? He leans against the wall, suddenly more relaxed. There's a system, and then, with the air of someone revealing his secret sauce recipe, he tells you about Florence's underground tailor culture, the seamsmiths. Tailors who specialize in hiding illegal elements so well that even the blown costume can't find them. Silver thread woven only under the arms. Jewels sewn into the underside of sleeves. Invisible flash, they call it. You spend the day learning. Remigio shows you how to hide a golden trim under a fold that only reveals itself when you bow. He explains how layered hems can conceal entire phrases, blessings, insults, poems, in Latin or French. Some people carry love letters in their cuffs, he adds. One man asked for a map to his mistress's villa. I told him where it was. That evening, you meet another seamsmith. Bastian, a man who only works at night and keeps fabric samples pinned inside his coat like weapons. He doesn't talk much, except about thread count. You watch him build a collar that looks plain gray under torchlight, but turns lilac in the morning sun. Peasant dust, he calls it. Legal from dawn to dusk, depending on who's watching. Historians still debate whether this subculture was a coordinated resistance to sumptuary laws or simply a side effect of rich people getting bored. Either way, it created an entire economy of illusion fashion. Clothes that didn't just pass inspection, they smirked at it. Eventually, you decide to commission something. You want it bold, but subtle. Dangerous, but deniable. You want something that says, I respect the law, with a heavy wig. Bastian accepts the challenge. Over the next few days, you return to his workshop each night, watching as he slowly constructs what he calls the whispering doublet. It's lined with fragments of silver lace that shimmer only at certain angles. The buttons are carved from dark wood, but in the right light, you can see tiny etchings of mythical beasts, dragons, griffins, and one deeply anxious-looking goose. Everyone's got a spirit animal, Bastian shrugs. The final flourish is a secret. You ask what it is. He smiles and says, you'll find out when someone else notices it. You wear it to a poetry reading hosted by a wealthy widow with a suspicious number of cats. The crowd is a mix of legal grays and fashionable felonies. Your doublet draws glances, but not summons, until one man leans over and whispers, Is your cuff embroidered with Virgil's name?" You glance down. You hadn't noticed. But there it is, clear as dawn. 2 Regier Imperio Populos, Romaine, Memento. You look up. The man waits. Illegal quotations. Classy. A week later, you learn that this entire genre, hidden Latin quotes in clothing, has become popular among Florence's young artists. They call themselves the Invisibles. You've accidentally started a trend. Again, odd fact. In Bologna, a group of students once wore matching belts that spelled out the Magna Carta in secret code. The city fined them, not for the message, but for synchronized accessories, which apparently implied subversion. Still, not everyone appreciates the finesse of invisible rebellion. Your landlady corners you after Massachusetts. "I saw your buttons," she says. "That goose looks possessed." You try to laugh it off. She doesn't. The next morning, you find a note tacked to your door. "Too fabulous. Keep it down." It's inside. You keep it. That afternoon, you visit Remigio again. "What's the pettiest fine you've ever seen?" you ask. He doesn't hesitate. A man was cited for wearing fur in August. Not because of the fur, because the inspector said it made him look untrustworthy. He adds, "Another time, a girl got fined for dancing in boots. The law said formal wear required, and someone decided her ankle movement was too joyful." You ask if he's ever been fined. Remigio gives you a look. "Do I look like someone who gets caught?" Later that night, you practice bowing in front of a mirror, trying to trigger the shimmer under your collar without being obvious. It works. Barely. And just as you're about to undress, you notice something tucked under the hem of your doublet. A note stitched directly into the lining. It reads, "Style is patience. Law is mood. You are the in-between." You smile. Maybe fashion is poetry, and you've just become the punchline of a very well-dressed joke. You hear about it first from a fishmonger. He's filleting something questionably legal and humming a hymn off-key when he leans over and whispers, "There was a bishop at last night's banquet. Pink shoes. Real ones. Not dyed. Imported." You blink. "Pink? What kind of pink?" "Not a peasant's pink," he mutters. "A Persian rose." That sets off a chain reaction. You hear it again at the bathhouse. Then from your favorite wine merchant, who seems positively giddy. And by sundown, the whole city is whispering about the shoes. A bishop wore Persian rose slippers. In public. At a state banquet. With the Pope's envoy in attendance. It's not illegal, per se, but it's the kind of move that says, "I dare you to stop me." Naturally, you want details. And you're not alone. The next morning, you go to Remigio's shop and find him threading pearls into a velvet hood, already mid-rant. He wore them with white hose. Remigio says, scandalized, like some kind of sugar-dusted cardinal. You sit down, grin. Do tell. Turns out the bishop in question is Alessandro di Vincigliata, a man infamous for preaching humility while hoarding silk. Rumor has it he once fined a monk for wearing embroidered sandals, then ordered the same pair in green. But the pink shoes? That's new. Historians still debate whether Alessandro meant it as political commentary, personal indulgence, or a strategic distraction during tense negotiations. What's known as this? The banquet was meant to celebrate a peace treaty between Florence and a papal territory. Instead, everyone left talking about his footwear. And here's where it gets better. You discover that the shoes were not custom-made. They belonged to a Roman noblewoman who, for reasons that remain gloriously unclear, mailed them to Alessandro with a note. "For your next step toward grace." He wore them without removing the pearl toe tassels. You marvel. There's dressing fabulously. And then there's weaponizing past out. The fallout was immediate. Some clerics praised his bravery. Others called it heresy. The Pope's envoy reportedly burst out laughing halfway through dessert and didn't stop until the cheese course. You head to the banquet hall later that week. Not to gawk. Well, okay, to gawk, but also to see what's left. The room still smells faintly of oranges and sweat. You find the spot where Alessandro stood and imagine the pink glow under candlelight. You wonder if his ankles trembled when he stepped in, or if he floated like a flamingo on a mission. Outside, a group of young artists have already painted a mural, The Ascension of the Slippered Bishop. It shows Alessandro levitating, arms raised, soles glowing. Odd fact, in 15th century France, One noble family briefly insisted all dinner guests wear matching slippers as a sign of loyalty. One guest refused and was politely escorted out by a man in full armor holding a cushion. Back in Florence, the bishop scandal kicks off a flurry of shoe-based innovation. Remigio shows you a new commission, barely legal sandals with transparent mesh panels that sparkle only in direct sunlight. Technically breathable, he says. Good for the soul. Soon, you're attending salon talks titled Theological Implications of Footwear in Civic Diplomacy. One includes a slideshow of fresco feet, annotated in Latin. And here's the kicker. No one punishes Alessandro. Not formally. Instead, the laws shift. Just slightly. Within a month, a new clause appears in Florence's fashion ordinances. Ecclesiastical footwear shall be subdued in tone, unless otherwise dictated by ceremony or mercy. What does that mean? No one knows. Which means it means anything. You realize something important that night. Sometimes, fashion rules change because someone breaks them loud enough. Later, you pass by a church and see a priest wearing deep lilac cuffs. You raise an eyebrow. He raises his hands in prayer. You don't report him. You start noticing the color creep everywhere. Blush pink sashes, dusty rose ribbons tucked into collars. One widow stitches pale pink thread into her mourning veil. To annoy my sister, she tells you. One day, Constanza di Rovere appears at the theater in a robe lined with what can only be described as righteous salmon. You sit beside her and whisper, making a statement. She doesn't look away from the stage. I'm just warming my ankles. She's smiling though. The bishop, for his part, disappears from the public eye for a few weeks. The rumors fly. Some say he's in Rome. Others swear he's been exiled to a monastery in the hills, forced to wear burlap and reflect. Then, one Sunday morning, you see him again, striding through the market square in regulation black robes and pink gloves. Subtle, unapologetic, perfectly legal. Historians still debate if the gloves were a final act of defiance or just cold fingers. But people remember, and you do too. You never get close enough to ask. You wouldn't dare. But you do start collecting accessories in softer shades. Just in case. You're standing awkwardly in a room that smells like turpentine, garlic, and ambition. A man with charcoal-stained fingers is squinting at your face like he's reading a warning label. Turn slightly, he says. No, too much. Less heroic. More regrettable. You're having your portrait painted. Well, technically, you're sitting for a visual testament to your civic virtue. But everyone knows these portraits are just Renaissance social media. You're hoping to look modest, tasteful, respectably stylish. Maybe even get invited to a luncheon. The painter's name is Matteo. His mustache has more personality than most of your friends. And he's very, very specific about color. What's this fabric? He asks, tapping the shoulder of your tunic with a brush. We'll blend, you reply, with a whisper of silk. He raises an eyebrow. Is that a legal whisper? You pause. It's an indoor whisper. He grins. Perfect. Now hold still while I make you look slightly richer than you are. And that's the unspoken truth of portraiture in the 15th century. No one paints what is. They paint what should have been, could have been, or will be, if the Pope dies unexpectedly and you inherit something. In fact, historians still debate how many Renaissance portraits accurately reflect fashion laws. Evidence suggests that artists routinely flouted sumptuary regulations on behalf of their subjects. You may have been fined for wearing too many pearls in real life, but in oil and egg tempera, you're basically a chandelier. Matteo works fast. He paints your robe deeper than it is, adds a golden chain you didn't wear, and gives you a complexion that says, I nap indoors and drink water filtered through lace. You let him. It's a free upgrade. But 3 days later, a courier delivers a letter stamped with the seal of the worn costume. Apparently, someone saw the portrait. It's not illegal to sit for one, of course. But if the painting depicts you wearing items you aren't legally allowed to wear, that can trigger an investigation. It's all very theoretical and extremely inconvenient. You find Matteo at his studio, now painting a merchant's son to look like a visiting prince. They sent a letter? He asks, unsurprised. Do they find people for imaginary crimes now? He shrugs. Florence. They find a man last year for portraying himself as taller. You sigh. Together, you decide to make some edits. Matteo will age the robe in the painting. Dull the luster, shorten the sleeves, maybe remove a tassel or two. He calls it reverse retouching. While he works, you flip through his other commissions. That's when you realize nearly every person looks richer in oil than they do in reality. One woman is depicted in a sapphire gown with a neckline that would cause an ecclesiastical breakdown. In truth, she's known to wear gray wool and mutter during dinner. One portrait shows a child in a velvet cap with silver thread. He was sick that day, Matteo murmurs. But the family insisted. Odd fact, in Florence, some families commission baby portraits dressed in full court attire, just in case the baby didn't survive long enough to break the law themselves. The logic was, if they can't wear it in life, let them wear it in oil. You think that's morbid? Also strangely sweet. Matteo finishes the changes and hands you a rolled-up version to approve. The you in the painting now looks respectable, slightly boring. You nod. 2 days later, the same official visits your home. He looks at the painting, looks at you, and says, "You've become more lawful since last week." Commendable. He leaves without a fine. But the story doesn't end there. Your adjusted portrait becomes unexpectedly popular. Matteo hangs a copy in his shop window, and people start requesting the regulated robe look. Within a month, it's a trend. You receive a letter from someone titled Contessa D something, thanking you for bringing humility back to elegance. You laugh so hard, you spill olive oil on your linen. Meanwhile, Matteo is flooded with orders. He invents a new painting genre, sumptuary safe glamour. He even creates little swatches of legal colors on parchment for clients to point at. The sober crimson, the pious navy, the repentant mauve. Your fame becomes a problem. Remigio tells you he's had 3 clients request your sleeves. One even brought a sketch and said, "Make me like that man." But poor, you consider wearing a bag over your head for a week. Instead, you do what everyone else does when the laws get too weird. You leave town, just for a while. A quiet retreat to the hills. You bring 2 tunics, a brush, and a book of Virgil. You wear simple shoes. You pretend to be tired of city life. But part of you knows you'll be back. Because Florence may drive you mad with its velvet drama and lace laws. But it's also the only place where a painting of your shoulder can change your social status. As you lie under the olive trees, you wonder, if you were painted honestly, without embellishment, without hidden thread or suggestive collars, who would that person be? You decide not to find out. You return to Florence ready to keep a low profile, but your wardrobe has other ideas. You left wearing beige. You come back wearing a cloak you swear was gray when you packed it, but somehow now looks like ambitious taupe. The street judges you instantly. You get 2 polite nods and 1 disapproving glare from a child. You keep walking. Your plan is simple. Sell off your more questionable clothes, make some florins, and maybe finally buy legal shoelaces. No more subtle embroidery. No more shimmering lining. Just one clean, lawful existence. It goes wrong immediately. You start at the Mercato Nuovo, Florence's buzzing marketplace. You open a small stall with the innocuous name Modest Inheritance, offering used clothing with a side of repentance. You expect judgment. Instead, you get a crowd. People love your wares. Too much. A woman leans over a faded cloak and whispers, "Is this the one you wore to the bishop's pink shoe banquet?" You shrug noncommittally. The price doubles. A banker's wife buys a tunic you once had lace inside. "I heard the blonde costume never found it," she says with admiration. By day 3, your little stall is being discussed by name in barbershops and bakeries. Someone coins the phrase outlaw linen. And the money? It's obscene. One silk line vest you thought was ruined sells for 8 florins. That's 2 months of cheese. You reinvest immediately, more stalls, new signage, better stitching. You hire a boy named Pippo to shout things like, "Once worn, never find." The irony hits you. You're profiting from clothes the government deemed too luxurious to wear. You're now wealthy from being illegally stylish. Historians still debate whether sumptuary fines were a moral tool or simply a brilliant side hustle generator for the already fashionable. But your personal spreadsheet? Very clear. By week 2, you've created a small empire. Other people start copying you. Vendors with names like Gently Frowned Upon, Velvet Crimes, and the acceptable amount of fabulous. The blonde costume doesn't shut you down. How could they? You're selling pre-fine fashion. It's like laundering clothes and reputations. Then something strange happens. You start getting letters. Not from angry officials, but from people thanking you. A widower writes to say the tunic he bought helped him get through his daughter's wedding without crying too early. The lining gave me courage, he adds. A young man claims the shirt he bought from you gave him the confidence to ask a bookseller to dinner. It worked. They're now embroidering bookmarks together. You didn't mean to start a movement, but apparently you've created one. People call it pre-find confidence. Even Pippo starts dressing better. One day he arrives in a doublet so sharply cut it could start a revolution. Got it from a guy named Bruno, he says proudly. 3 florins and a blessing. But of course, nothing good goes unfound in Florence. One morning, a city official stops by your stall. He smiles too politely. His shoes are aggressively legal. I'm just here for a tally, he says. Not an inspection. You nod. He notes how many garments you've sold. He asks about the profits. He compliments your tunic, which is now so ordinary it's suspicious. Then, with a slight cough, he presents you with a bill. Secondary income tax on previously fined goods sold at inflated rates for purposes of civic popularity. You blink. That's not a real law. He smiles. It is now. You pay. It hurts, but it's also kind of impressive. You sit on a stool that evening, watching people browse the racks, laughing to themselves, holding up cuffs and saying, "Can I get away with this?" It's like watching fashion therapy in real time. Odd fact, in late 15th century Naples, some vendors used to sell punishable garments with prepaid fines attached. You'd buy a shirt and get a receipt. Fine covered. Wear without shame. It turned fashion into a pay-to-play performance. You consider doing the same, but instead, you do something different. You set up a special section in your stall, small, quiet, unmarked. No prices, no names, just clothes that meant something to you. The doublet with the hidden Virgil quote, the sleeve that shimmers under candlelight, a collar that once survived a rainstorm and a sermon. You label it, for trade, not sale. The next morning, someone leaves a cloak with a silk lining that smells faintly of rosemary. No note. The morning after that, a belt arrives with a buckle shaped like a sleeping lion. Then a pair of gloves so soft they feel like secrets. You never find out who leaves them, but you recognize some of the pieces later, on street performers, on young lovers, on a nun quietly wearing a ribbon that glows under sunlight. Your stall becomes something more than fashion. It becomes memory, trade, community, a kind of outlaw boutique for the sleep-deprived and style-inclined. And one day, as you adjust a sleeve on a cloak too beautiful for logic, Pippo asks, "Why do you think they ever tried to stop all this?" You look around. Because, you think, style makes people feel free. And freedom is hard to regulate. You've barely had time to enjoy your empire of reformed fashion felonies when a duchess walks into your life and ruins your schedule. Her name is Isabella d'Este. You know the type. High cheekbones, cold voice, and eyes that have definitely seen someone exiled before breakfast. Her entourage walks in first, 2 ladies-in-waiting and a man who seems to exist solely to carry her dog. You're rearranging a rack of illegally ruffled collars when she speaks. "I need silk." You nod. Legal or exciting? She doesn't answer. Instead, she pulls out a swatch of fabric the color of midnight caught in candlelight. It's unlike anything you've seen. The texture? Iridescent. The weave? Impossibly fine. It's Venetian silk, contraband of the highest order. "I want 3 gowns made," she says, handing you the fabric. "And no one can know." You pause. Do you want it to look illegal? Or just be illegal? A faint smile. Both. You consider your options. Saying no to a duchess is rarely healthy. Saying yes means you'll need help and discretion. That night, you meet Remigio and Bastian at your usual haunt, the cellar of a wine merchant who believes in unlicensed storytelling. Over candlelight and almond cakes, you lay it out. Remigio frowns. Venetian silk? Isabella must have bribed 5 customs clerks just to carry it across the river. Bastian shrugs. I've worked with worse. Once stitched smuggled Spanish brocade into a bishop's sleeves during confession. Was he repenting? You ask. Not even close. You hatch a plan. You'll create 3 gowns. One for travel, deceptively plain. One for court appearances, lined with the contraband silk but masked with legal overlay. And one for the duchess to wear in private, possibly while laughing at morality over wine. The next few weeks are chaos. You become a nocturnal dressmaker, ducking past watchmen with bundles hidden in flour sacks. You learn more about the trade routes than you ever wanted to. how Venetian silk is sometimes disguised as drapery, how customs agents can be distracted with honeyed wine and off-key singing. At one point, you bribe a librarian to lose the law book describing Venetian textiles as morally aggressive. Odd fact, in Siena, a law once defined dangerous silk as any fabric that caused excessive turning of heads. There was even a formula. 3 turns per minute was forgivable for required penance. 5 meant exile or marriage. The first gown is finished quickly. A modest traveling dress with a brilliant lining that whispers scandal only when she sits down. Isabella inspects it with a critical eye. Too safe, she mutters. You hide your pride. The second gown is trickier. You design a layered system that hides the silk under regulated linen. At first glance, it's demure. But as the Duchess moves, the silk flickers, just a hint of rebellion beneath every legal fold. The laws say nothing about silk in motion, bastion notes, stitching. The third gown is art. You pour every illegal idea you've ever suppressed into it. Invisible seams, contraband dyes, sleeves that dance like rumors, a collar that practically smirks. When Isabella tries it on, she doesn't speak for a full minute. Finally, she says, it feels like wearing a secret, which of course it is. You deliver the gowns in silence, your hands aching, your conscience buzzing with moral caffeine. The Duchess pays you with a purse of florins so heavy it could concuss a moralist. But more than that, she leaves you a token, a brooch shaped like a coiled serpent, its eye a tiny, perfect ruby. No law yet about accessories with opinions, she says before disappearing into the night. You feel giddy. You also feel watched. Because 2 days later, the Blown costume posts a new proclamation. All garments exhibiting foreign textile shimmer or suggestive layering may be subject to confiscation. Suggestive layering? That's your invention. Historians still debate whether this proclamation was a direct response to your gowns or simply another round in Florence's never-ending war on style. But one thing is clear, you've stirred something. You lay low, close your stall for inventory, spend your nights sorting through legal scrap fabric that feels like a punishment. And then, one evening, a letter arrives. No seal, just a single line, written in steady ink. The silk moved like prayer. They'll never prove it. No signature, but you know who it's from. You smile, and you wonder, how many other rule breakers are out there, quietly dazzling behind linen? Because silk may wrinkle, but subversion? Subversion always wears well. It starts with a hat, not yours, for once. This one belonged to Giulio Bardi, a minor Florentine noble known mainly for his love of pastry and his stunning inability to whisper. He wears a hat the size of a midsummer melon, trimmed in saffron-colored ribbon, with a peacock feather so long it could be used as a fencing foil. And unfortunately, that feather becomes the final straw. You're there, halfway through a lukewarm sausage roll at a friend's engagement party, when the argument breaks out. I said it's excessive, bellows one of the bride's uncles, his beard trembling with outrage. It's traditional, Giulio counters, flicking the feather just a little too hard. My great-uncle wore this exact hat during the War of the Wooden Bridge. He died in that war, someone mutters, because he wasn't distracting enough. Giulio shouts, and that's when someone slaps someone else with a glove. It's absurd. It's dramatic. And by the time you finish your sausage roll, Giulio and the uncle are marching toward the river for what can only be described as the most fashion-forward duel Florence has ever seen. You follow at a distance, not because you're nosy, you are, but because you sense this might become something bigger. You're not wrong. What starts as a slap escalates into a full duel, with seconds, witnesses, and a man assigned solely to hold Giulio's hat between rounds. The blade work is sloppy. Giulio nearly trips over a pine cone. The uncle yells something about decency and feathers that tickle sin. By some miracle or lack of commitment, no one is mortally wounded, but both walk away with minor cuts and major scandal. And the hat, it's flung dramatically into the Arno River, where it floats like a guilty conscience. The next morning, the Blown costume posts an urgent notice. Let it be known, garments and accessories inciting conflict, challenge, or violence are henceforth banned from all civic gatherings. Feathered adornments above 5 inches are to be taxed or confiscated. Florence collectively gasps. A 5-inch feather limit? That's barely enough to say, I'm whimsical. You meet Remigio at the fountain, both holding mugs of overboiled coffee. So, he says, weapons are fine, but fashion is too dangerous now. You nod. Apparently, only swords are allowed to be flamboyant. You wake to church bells and shouting, which usually means a wedding, a fire, or taxes. Today, it's embroidery. You shuffle out into the sunlit street, half-dressed and wholly curious, and find a mob outside the Palazzo Vecchio. A woman in a moss green dress is waving a handkerchief and yelling something about stitched tyranny. You blink. Are we protesting? Remigio appears beside you like a well-dressed ghost. Apparently the council has declared unauthorized gold thread a civic threat. You pause. Like treason? He nods. Exactly. Decorative treason. It started, as these things often do, with someone too rich and too bored. A noblewoman named Allegra di Saluzzo commissioned a robe embroidered with gold vines, twisting up the sleeves like they were trying to whisper forbidden fates. She wore it to a baptism. The baby cried. Someone said it was the robe. So the blonde costume drafted a new clause. Gold thread may not exceed 3 inches per garment, nor form any image suggestive of dominance, fertility, or celestial arrogance. Celestial arrogance? Historians still debate whether the real concern was the gold, the vines, or the fact that Allegra once told a bishop his chalice looked like it had self-esteem issues. But the people? They'd had enough. By midday, the square is buzzing. Artisans, tailors, laundresses, even apothecaries, everyone with thread or taste is furious. Someone holds up a banner stitched entirely in legally questionable copper wire. It reads, "Let U.S. embroider in peace." You're pulled into the crowd by Bastian, who looks exhilarated. "We're calling it the Gold Thread Rebellion," he says. Catchy, yes. You don't disagree. Even Pippo's here, waving a small pillow embroidered with a duck and the words "mildly opulent." The protest isn't violent. It's weirdly stylish. One man is wearing 30 small patches of legal gold thread arranged to spell, "This is fine." A woman has embroidered a line of the band Dante Inferno verse into the hem of her apron. You spot someone walking their dog in a ruff with sparkle. The council doesn't know what to do. Arrest people? For looking slightly better than usual? They retreat into the building, possibly to write a strongly worded poem. Odd fact, in Genoa, a brief rebellion broke out in the 1490s over sequin regulation. Women sewed miniature protest letters into their bodices and claimed it was interior decoration, not insurrection. It worked. Back in Florence, the gold thread rebellion rolls on. Someone begins handing out tiny badges, a thimble over a lightning bolt. The slogan? "Stitch, don't snitch." You're handed a spool of thread and told to make a statement. You settle on embroidering a sash with small gold leaves, 3 inches long, spaced at perfect legal intervals. The result is modest, but if you spin fast enough, it gleams like firelight. You wear it proudly. By nightfall, the protest has become a street party. People are dancing, singing. A man juggles pincushions. A small group of musicians invent a song called "Thread Me Like You Mean It." It's catchy. You hum it for days. And then, the unexpected happens. A representative from the blown costume steps onto a balcony. He's wearing a gray robe so dull it could cure insomnia. He clears his throat and holds up a parchment. The council, he says, has decided to reconsider the clause. There's a pause. Then the crowd cheers. He tries to continue, but no one's listening. The moment is already a victory. You later learn the clause isn't exactly repealed, just rephrased. Now gold thread is legal if it forms images of natural harmony or appears subtly within devotional context. Which, of course, means anything you say it means. Remigio grins as he reads the amendment. You can now embroider grapes and call it theology. Wine is holy, you nod. Constanza di Rovere shows up that night, wearing a veil lined with constellations stitched in silver gold hybrid thread. Inspired by the heavens, she explains, eyes twinkling. No one finds her. The rebellion fades as rebellions often do, not with a bang, but with fabric. Tailors get bolder. Embroidery becomes louder. Even church garments start shimmering just a little more. You visit a street vendor who's selling socks with tiny lions stitched at the ankle. He calls them barefoot nobility. You buy 3 pairs. Later, someone paints a fresco of the gold thread rebellion. It shows dozens of smiling citizens, their robes gleaming, their needles raised. In the background, a judge with a headache. You visit it often. And sometimes, you swear the gold leaves on your sash shimmer a bit more when you're standing in front of it. It may not be a revolution, but it's the most beautiful protest Florence has ever seen. The fine arrives folded like a love letter. It's sealed in red wax, scented faintly of lavender and official disappointment. You don't even open it right away. You already know. It's the shoelaces. You try to be clever. A modest outfit. A humble tunic. But your shoes, hand-stitched with forest green laces tipped in bronze thread, apparently saying too loudly in the town square. The official wording? Shoelaces suggesting opulence through hue or sheen are prohibited for citizens of moderate station. Immediate suspension of embellishments is required. Suspension of embellishments. You feel ridiculous. You'd spent all week dodging suspicious collars and emotionally risky buttons, and now you're guilty because of lace flare. Hippo reads the fine aloud. Also, you've been banned from ruffled sleeves for 40 days. You pause. Specifically ruffled sleeves? He nods. Apparently yours flirted with grandeur. It's both deeply silly and entirely on brand for Florence. You march over to Remigio's workshop and slam the fine down on the table. He doesn't flinch. Instead, he gestures to the corner where 5 other people are quietly sipping wine and holding identical documents. Welcome to the Fraternal Order of Over-Decorated Feet, he says. We meet on Thursdays. He introduces them one by one. Beatrice, banned for wearing iridescent gloves during a storm. Carlo, fined for shoelaces shaped like dolphins. Lucrezia, charged with jewel overconcentration in an ankle chain. Old Marco, punished for walking too confidently in red. The 5th is a boy barely 17, beaming. I wore ribbon slippers to church, he says. The priest said I looked like temptation. Were you? You ask. He shrugs. Felt like it. You learn that shoelace fines have a long history. Historians still debate whether they were originally about class, dignity, or just an ongoing vendetta between cobblers and tailors. But the obsession with ankle decor is well documented. At one point, Florence had an actual lace inspector position, now retired, presumably in shape. You asked how the others cope. We swap sleeves, Beatrice says. Lucrezia has some loners. Very plain, emotionally beige. I write poetry, Carlo adds. Mostly about buttons. Marco just waits. I go barefoot for 40 days. Makes people nervous. You try all 3. The sleeves are itchy. The poetry is terrible. But the barefoot stroll? Surprisingly liberating. No one expects rebellion from toes. One night, you host a dinner for your fellow exiles. It's a ruffled affair in every way but clothing. Candlelight dances across dull linen and plain cuffs. The conversation sparkles more than the outfits. You laugh. A lot. Odd fact. In 1487, a noblewoman in Mantua held a similar gathering called La Cena dell'Abbandono, where guests wore their least flattering attire to remind each other of humility. The event sparked a counter-trend, humble flaunting, where rich people competed to look the most unimpressive while wearing secretly expensive undergarments. You try that too. You design an outfit so boring it practically apologizes, but line the inside with imported velvet dyed to match dusk. No one sees it, except one old woman on the street who smiles and mutters, "Good trick." You begin to notice a pattern. The fines come and go, but people don't stop being fabulous. They just get quieter, smarter. You learn to communicate with fabric like it's a dialect. A pleat that means "I'm watching." A hem that hums "Not today." A cuff that waits. On day 29 of your sleeve ban, you get a letter from the blonde costume. It says, cryptically, your sleeves may resume their former function. Be discreet. The phrase, former function, makes you laugh for hours. You celebrate your resleeving by hosting a small show in the alley behind Remigio's shop. No tickets, no names, just sleeves, fluttering, dramatic, rebellious sleeves. Some are ruffled. Some are embroidered with invisible thread. One is embroidered with the phrase, "This is legal, we checked." People come. They cheer quietly. Someone cries when they see a bell-shaped cuff that flutters like forgiveness. Constanza di Rovere appears in silence, wearing a gown with sleeves shaped like swan wings. You nod at each other. Words would be redundant. The next morning, someone's chalked a phrase onto the side of the magistrate's building. Let US be known by our sleeves. It's gone by noon. But for those who saw it, it stays. The city changes its mind, as Florence always does, this time about gender. It begins when a young woman named Benedetta strolls through the Piazza della Signoria wearing a codpiece. You hear about it before you see it. The rumor hits the market faster than a plague bell. She wore it like armor, someone whispers. It had embroidery. Another voice adds, and confidence. You hurry there, half disbelieving. But there she is, standing in front of a Neptune fountain, arms folded, unbothered by the stairs. Her codpiece is silver, subtle but shiny, and covered in stitched lemons. Someone finally asks, why? She shrugs. Why not? And just like that, fashion and gender spill into the streets like wine at a feast. The reaction is, predictably, chaotic. Within a week, 3 women show up to church in padded doublets. One nobleman appears at dinner in a lace-trimmed gown as a statement. A teenage boy stitches fake braids into his cap for aesthetic symmetry. Florence goes into a tailspin. Historians still debate whether this was a coordinated rebellion or simply a spontaneous unraveling of norms held together by increasingly silly laws. But what's certain is that it didn't start with politics. It started with lemons. On a codpiece. In spring, Remigio, ever practical, is delighted. Finally, he says, an excuse to sew everything on everyone. He begins designing dual-purpose outfits. Dresses that become jerkins, hose that button into skirts, cloaks with interchangeable silhouettes. He calls it adaptive defiance. You start helping. At first it's a joke, a blouse with mock epaulets, a corset with cufflinks, but then people actually want them. Orders flood in. Pippo invents a sash that unrolls into a cravat. You sew a pair of reversible gloves, one side dainty, the other dangerous. The people are restless, curious, and tired of being told which parts of their body are allowed to sparkle. That's when the council panics. They release a new directive. Clothing shall conform to the wearer's assigned civic role and public decorum, as reflected in traditional silhouettes and historical precedent. It's the longest way anyone has ever said, stop being interesting. Odd fact, in 15th century Venice, men once wore heels higher than their wives, claiming it was for navigational superiority. When women copied the trend, the council banned them both, citing wobbly authority. Back in Florence, the new law causes more confusion than control. What is a traditional silhouette? The council won't say. Is a codpiece legal if it holds perfume? Does lace count as ambiguous intent? What if your tunic was originally your aunt's? You host a salon night with artists and tailors. You call it Ambiguous Garments Anonymous. The conversation lasts 6 hours. Everyone leaves more confused and more inspired. You begin seeing the unexpected everywhere. A merchant's son in earrings shaped like quills. A laundress in a tunic so sharply tailored it could draft a legal appeal. A nun in a cloak that whispers like a question mark. Constanza di Rovere hosts a masked ball where everyone is required to dress as their second self. You go as a librarian with pockets big enough for poetry and pickles. Someone else goes as a disappointed statue. That night, a man wearing embroidered slippers and a milkmaid's bodice reads a poem so quietly it silences the room. No one asks what he's wearing. They only ask for the words again. The council doesn't find anyone. They're overwhelmed. Their offices are buried under petitions, embroidered letters, and fashion sketches labeled possible exceptions. Someone chalks a new phrase onto the cathedral steps. Who decides what a body is allowed to wear? You see it, and you decide it's not a question. It's a dare. So you design your masterpiece. A garment not for man or woman, not for clergy or commoner, not for law or defiance, just for presence. It has elements from everything you've ever made. Embroidery from your early stall days, a collar shaped like a half moon, sleeves inspired by sea waves and exile dreams. It sways but doesn't ask for attention. It hums. When you wear it to the open-air market, no one speaks for a full minute. Then someone says, softly, yes. You don't get fined. Instead, a child asks if you can make one for their grandmother, who hasn't liked clothes since grandpa died. Another man offers to trade 2 geese and a song for a version with buttons. You accept both. Later that night, Benedetta, the codpiece pioneer, visits you. She says nothing, just hands you a ribbon with stitched lemons and the word begin. You pin it to your sleeve. Because sometimes, clothing isn't just protection or rebellion. It's a beginning. You fall asleep dreaming of fabric. When you wake, the world is softer. There's something strange in the air, like a pause, a held breath. The streets are quieter. The usual clang of hammers and street gossip has been replaced with the low hum of expectation. And then you hear it. The king is in Pisa, someone whispers near the bakery, and he's wearing pajamas. You blink. Pajamas? Not a metaphor, not a euphemism. Actual pajamas. In public. Silk, loose, pale green, with tiny owls embroidered along the hem. You run to Remigio's workshop. He's already laughing, halfway through sketching a new pattern called Royal Leisure. It's true, he says. He greeted an entire trade delegation looking like he just rolled out of a monogrammed dream. The king, young, occasionally adored, frequently confused, has decided comfort is regal. So now, he wears robes meant for bedtime to meetings, processions, and, in one glorious instance, a papal brunch. Historians still debate whether he was trying to break tradition, make a statement about mortality, or just forgot his formal wear. Some say it was illness. Others say he called it conscious relaxation. Florence naturally implodes. Because here's the thing. If the king wears pajamas, what's illegal anymore? Remigio sighs. You can't regulate lace while the crown's in slippers. The blown costume panics. They can't find the king. They can't ignore him either. So they do what any bureaucracy does when confused. They overcorrect. A new edict arrives. Nightwear and intimate garments may not be worn in public unless in possession of noble title or written permission from a medical authority. This causes immediate confusion. Apothecaries begin issuing fake medical notes like confetti. One reads, "Patient experiences emotional vertigo when wearing trousers." Another, "Recommend free-flowing robes to manage spiritual congestion." You decide to test the system. You put on your softest linen robe, technically a nightshirt. You add a sash embroidered with an excuse, prescribed for dreams. Then you walk to the main square carrying a loaf of bread. No one stops you. In fact, people nod. One woman curtsies. A child whispers, he's ill with vision. You become respected. Odd fact. In Hungary during the 1400s, nobles were occasionally buried in their finest nightshirts, believing that looking relaxed impressed angels. You figure, might as well impress the living too. By week's end, the whole city is a blur of gauzy elegance. Slippers in the Senate, bed caps at the opera. Someone wears a silk robe to testify in court and wins the case. Pippo starts selling formal pajamas. One model is lined with discreet bells. Constanza hosts an evening salon where everyone is required to wear garments they once swore never to be seen in. It becomes a soft, vulnerable, deeply fabulous night. The kind that smells like wine and release. She wears an old dressing gown with a single golden stripe down the side. "For closure," she says. "You wear the same robe from your trial years ago. Crimson velvet, gold lining. Technically still illegal." You sit on a cushion, sip almond milk, and feel the years melt off like old wax. At some point, the conversation turns. What happens when there are no more rules? When fashion isn't about resistance, but ritual? If you can wear anything, do you still want to? You look down at your robe, soft and familiar. It holds weight, but not rebellion anymore. Just memory. The next morning, the king issues a statement. Fashion should soothe the soul, but not put the city to sleep. And that, it seems, is the line. Within days, the blonde costume returns to action. Not aggressively, just nudging, replacing fines with fashionable advisories, suggesting instead of threatening. They publish a new guideline titled Dignified Ease, Balancing Softness and Authority. You laugh. Then you write a reply in the margins and mail it in. Try silk. It helps. Later that week, someone chalks another message outside the cathedral. You can be comfortable and still look like a threat. And Florence seems to agree. You keep your robe, but you add a collar that means business. You know what day it is the moment you wake up. The air tastes like risk. Your tunic is breathing heavily in the wardrobe. Your boots creak with anticipation. It's your 41st day of fashion freedom. And that means only one thing. You're going out in your last illegal outfit. You've planned it for weeks, maybe months, if you count all the daydreams stitched together during past fines and passive-aggressive glances. Every thread is chosen. Every hem is a secret. You lay it out like a confession. First, the underlayer, a simple chemise made of whisper-thin fabric dyed the color of clouded pearl. Perfectly legal, perfectly forgettable. Then, the tunic, crimson again. always crimson. But this one has silver thread stitched into the pattern of climbing ivy, twisting just enough to suggest ambition. The collar is high, because drama lives in the neck. The sleeves are voluminous, ruffled just slightly past the limit, but trimmed in ash gray satin. The real magic? The lining. It flickers. You step into the boots slowly, savoring the moment. Calfskin, soft as apology, with little embroidered suns on each toe. Why suns? Because someone, somewhere, once said your joy was too loud. You want them to hear it again. You don't walk to the piazza. You arrive. It's a sunny afternoon. The kind of light that makes the city look smug. People stop mid-step to glance at you. Not just because you're radiant, but because you're uncertain. Is it legal? Is it ceremonial? Is this person newly noble? Recently widowed? Newly mad? You love the ambiguity. You sit at your favorite cafe. You order a wine that sparkles. You wait, and then someone sits beside you. She's wearing a gown that breaks 6 laws on its own. Layers of translucent gauze, curls at the knuckles, and her veil, so faint it might be memory. It's Constanza di Rovere. She lifts a brow. So, this is the one. You nod. The last one. She smiles. Does it feel like armor? You look down at the shimmer, the subtle movement, the way your collar almost flutters in the breeze like it has an opinion. No, you say. It feels like a question. And then, it happens. Someone across the piazza drops their bread. They stare. They walk over. Excuse me, they say. Are you taking commissions? You blink. For what? For confidence. They gesture at your outfit like it's a sermon. Before you can answer, a second person approaches. Then a third. You laugh, but not nervously, because deep down, you've known this was coming. This wasn't your last illegal outfit. It was your most honest one. Odd fact. In parts of medieval India, certain dancers were legally allowed to wear gold in public, not because of wealth, but because their movements deserved it. You like that. That night, you walk home slowly. Your sleeves catch the moonlight. Someone claps once as you pass. You arrive at your door. You remove your shoes. You hang up the tunic. You run your fingers over the threads. You breathe. And then you do something wild. You fold the outfit carefully, tuck it into a trunk, and write on the lid. For the day someone else needs to remember who they are. Because the laws may change, and the fabric may fade, but the feeling? That never wrinkles. The streets of Florence grow quiet as the moon settles low, casting silver lace across tiled rooftops. Somewhere, a ruffled sleeve rustles behind a shutter. Somewhere else, a shoelace glints, soft rebellion tied in a gentle knot. You're still. You're warm. And now, at last, the noise of judgment and velvet scandal softens into something kinder, like a sigh, or memory folded neatly at the end of a bed. Tonight, you wore your truth, stitched it with care, lined it with mischief, let it move freely through light and law. And though the city may never quite know what to do with people like you, it watches, it listens, and it changes, however slowly. Maybe tomorrow they'll write a new rule about collar width, or ban lemon embroidery, or fine someone for looking too dreamy before breakfast. But that's not your worry now, because you've learned something deeper than fashion codes and civic decorum. Style isn't about approval, it's about presence. And tonight, your presence was enough to turn heads, turn hearts, maybe even turn a page in an old dusty book full of outdated decrees and barely legal buttons. So let it go, let the fabric fall, let the seams rest, let your story, absurd and glorious, drift gently into the folds of sleep. The tunics will wait, the thread will hold. The city, as always, will wake tomorrow hungry for new colors and new questions. But you've earned your rest. Good night.